Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer and deconstruct a deeply held assumption about the human face. I mean, have you ever looked in the mirror and tried to categorize your own eyes? Like, are they almond, round, hooded? Well, it turns out those simple little labels, they actually hide a fascinating, beautifully complex biological reality that spans thousands of generations.
Section 1. The almond eye myth, deconstructing a cosmetic label. We constantly use these simple shapes to describe human features, right? But biology, it rarely works that neatly.
So, to start off, your eyeball itself is roughly spherical. Honestly, it resembles a wet ping pong ball a lot more than an almond. When people say someone has almond-shaped eyes, they aren't actually talking about the eye at all. What they're really talking about is the biological window that frames it. The crucial point here is that what we casually call almond-shaped is actually just the outline of this specific opening. The medical term for it is the palpebral fissure. And here is the secret. It doesn't come in clean, universal categories. There is literally no universal almond eye measurement accepted anywhere across anatomy, genetics, or medicine. None.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Beauty guides constantly use overlapping labels to describe completely different anatomical parts. Think about it. Almond describes the outline, upturned describes the angle, and hooded is all about the skin folding over. So what does that mean? It means a single person can actually have almond-shaped, upturned, and hooded eyes all at the exact same time. Human anatomy just hasn't agreed to organize itself like some clean video game character creation menu.
Section 2. Anatomy of an opening, the geometric frame of the eye. Let's move over to the physical structures themselves and see how they build this geometric frame around our vision.
So, instead of one simple shape, our face relies on these highly variable physical traits that combine to dictate exactly how much of the eyeball is actually exposed. You've got the inner and outer corners, that's the medial and lateral canvas, which dictate the tilt. Then you have the curvature of the eyelids, the underlying orbital bone structure, and even fat pads pushing and pulling the skin. If you change just one of these slightly, the eye looks entirely different. Change several of them together and, well, people might suddenly call the result almond-shaped.
This perfectly illustrates one of the most talked about features, the epicanthic fold, which is that skin partially covering the inner corner. Now, this isn't just an on or off switch that separates humanity into two different kinds of eyes. It's a continuous trait. It is found in populations all over the world, from East Asia to Southern Africa to Europe. And get this, it's incredibly common in babies globally just because they have flatter nasal bridges. As a kid's nose grows, that fold might disappear, or it might just stick around.
Section 3. The genetic sliders. Thousands of instructions. To really understand why these anatomical parts vary so much from person to person, we have to look a bit deeper into human inheritance.
You see, facial morphology is polygenic. That means there is absolutely no single almond eye gene just waiting to be switched on. Instead, you inherit thousands of tiny genetic instructions. It's kind of like having thousands of sliders on this massive biological soundboard, constantly adjusting bone growth, facial fat, skin thickness, and muscle position. Not a single one of those sliders is labeled almond. It is the beautifully complex combination of all of them that creates the final visible result.
And you know, this is exactly why two siblings can have noticeably different eye shapes despite sharing the exact same parents. Genetic recombination basically shuffles the deck before it's passed on. You get roughly half your DNA from each parent, right? But you're not getting the same half as your sibling. So one of you might inherit a higher outer corner while the other gets a taller opening or a stronger crease. You both look like you belong to the same family, but neither of you is a carbon copy.
Section 4. Evolution, climate, and chance. Unraveling prehistoric origins. So how exactly did these specific genetic traits spread across the globe over thousands of years?
You might have actually heard the famous explanation that narrower eyes evolved specifically to protect against blizzards and snow glare. And yeah, while this sounds like a perfectly neat, established fact, the scientific evidence just isn't strong enough. For one thing, soft tissue simply doesn't fossilize, meaning we literally can't measure the eyelids of our ancient ancestors. Plus, similar eyelid features like epicanthic folds also appear in very hot, dry environments like southern Africa.
The truth is, evolution owes us no clean explanation. Honestly, it involves way more sheer luck than most motivational posters would have you believe. Traits can become common simply due to some very messy overlapping forces. A small group might isolate with certain traits by pure coincidence. That's called a founder effect. Or trait frequencies just randomly change over generations through genetic drift. Throw in constant human migration, and these genetic traits get continuously shuffled across any supposed boundaries. Sometimes, traits are just hitchhiking alongside other selected genes.
Section 5. The illusion of categories. Gradients versus rigid boxes. This all brings us to a fascinating scientific mystery, and really, the historical obsession with categorizing the human face.
Back in the 19th and 20th centuries, racial theorists tried to divide humanity up into rigid categories, using eye angles, folds, and skulls as biological borders. But here's the thing. While the physical measurements those historical researchers took were real, the rigid boxes they tried to put people in were completely false. Modern genetics clearly shows us that human populations share the overwhelming majority of their DNA. Variation changes gradually across geography, forming gradients, not hard lines. Race basically attempts to draw hard borders across a species built entirely from these gentle, continuous gradients.
And here is where the whole concept of a fixed eye shape truly falls apart. Think about this. Your definitive eye shape can literally change just because someone told a really good joke. Because we interpret the whole face rather than detached measurements, a sincere smile instantly raises the cheeks and lifts the lower lids. Fatigue or crying lowers the lid. Aging completely rearranges those fat pads. Even things like contrast from makeup, eyeliner, or iris color completely alter the perceived geometry. The poor almonds never stood a chance, right?
There's a great quote that says, "Human beings are not geography quizzes with eyelashes." And that powerfully highlights a core truth. Trying to determine someone's exact ethnicity or evolutionary history purely from the shape of their palpebral fissure is just completely unreliable. Sure, a feature might suggest some broad patterns of ancestry, but by itself, it proves very little. Our faces reflect our unique, deeply personal ancestry, not some universal membership card printed on a single eyelid.
Ultimately, the eyeball itself stayed roughly round, while everything around it became this beautifully shifting frame. We are deeply socially wired to search each other's eyes for identity, emotion, and intention, so it makes sense that it's human nature to invent categories for what we find there. But we have to remember that an almond shape is just a simplified label for an incredibly complex, continuously evolving biological frame. So I'll leave you with this thought. If our underlying visual equipment is fundamentally the exact same across the globe, why do we continue forcing the incredible, shifting gradients of humanity into simple little boxes? Next time you look in the mirror, try to see the thousands of evolutionary sliders that made you, instead of just a simple shape.